let's go over to the other big story with COP28.
Okay.
We have international climate negotiations going on here, people.
Yes.
And we have some interesting results coming out. So the first thing that the United States has been talking about, their big commitment coming out of COP28, and really what they're pushing on the rest of the world stage, is cutting millions worth of methane emissions, millions of tons of methane emissions. So now the federal government, under a new Biden regulation, will work for the first time to require oil and gas producers to detect and fix leaks of methane in their oil drilling operations. Now, methane is a very, very potent greenhouse gas. I'm pretty sure it has 10 times the absorption rate of carbon dioxide. If it's not 10 times, it's something up there.
Yeah.
It doesn't last in the atmosphere as long as carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is there for like 100, 200 years. Methane's more like 5 to 20.
Yes.
So it's not as long lasting, but it dangerously speeds up the rate of global warming as it continues to get put into the atmosphere through these leaks in the drilling equipment. Mm-hmm. Now, the United States is going on the front lines of that. This is going to be really interesting because the United States, it might not be thought of like this, especially like we always hear how expensive gasoline is and stuff in the United States, but the U.S. is the largest oil producer in the entire world.
Yeah.
We produce almost twice as much oil as Saudi Arabia, if not twice as much, like 33% more or whatever, 50% more than Saudi Arabia. So a lot more oil. We're producing 16% of the world's total oil supply. Saudi Arabia is producing 11% of the world's oil supply.
It's just wild because that's not our story at all, right? Like the stories resonate so much about what OPEC decides to do with its oil production and the prices that it puts. So it's wild to kind of get that reality check.
No, I know. It's so interesting to look at this chart and think, oh, wait a second. Wait, let's look when Biden took office. Oh, wait a second. Our total share of oil production has gone from 14% of the global supply to 16% of the global supply.
Yeah.
I thought Biden was crushing fossil fuel production. Wait a second. It's grown dramatically since he took office. Like, it's so hard to...
reconcile.
But now, since we have such a large percentage of this, if we take the step of regulating these companies to control their methane leaks, that could have a massive positive impact very, very quickly, since so much of the oil is getting produced here at home.
Yeah, it can. It will help with methane. I heard one perspective on this that's like the U.S. generally has been in a good position because it's kind of, we just have to keep cleaning up our act with the oil production. So rather than like for crude oil production, it's not that we have to we will have to stop doing it, but in the meantime, we just have this methane waste product that's kind of been like, we have better ways to do the oil extraction that we can take on. So it's not that hard to transition to them. It's just that we have already existing methods and infrastructure in place that hasn't been taking care of the methane. And methane can actually be used as fuel, like it can be recycled as fuel on its own.
Right.
So we actually we significantly benefit by implementing this kind of policy.
No, for sure. Now, the God, I was going to say one more thing about this, but I don't remember.
I'm sorry.
No, it's all right. So now, in addition to fighting, this is what I was going to say. The oil industry is obviously furious at Biden and his administration for doing something like this. They are already saying that it's going to curb their ability to produce, and it's going to curb their, resilience and agility to handle international oil market shocks, because now they're going to have to take into account all these different regulations and all this. I just don't buy it. I don't believe them. It's obviously going to be an added upfront cost, but I think that they'll be able to manage just fine.
Yeah.
I'm not really concerned. I just think it's, it's corporate blustering. So
yeah, I think so too.
Yeah. Now, COP28, the U.S. has also pledged $3 billion to climate funds that go into building climate resiliency in poorer nations. This is a huge deal too. We always talk about how the developed nations that built their economies off the backs of fossil fuels, of carbon dioxide, have at least some obligation to assist the third world and the developing world with getting their economies resilient against the climate shocks that are coming because of our pollution, and growing their economies into green energy hubs and developing them past the point of needing fossil fuels.
Yeah. I think my thoughts are mixed on this, not as far as it's like are judging on how good of an idea it is. Obviously it's a good idea to fund resiliency in poorer countries, but as far as like building out the infrastructure for energy development, energy production in poorer countries as well.
Mm-hmm.
The funny thing is a lot of these poorer nations, they want to build renewable.
Oh yeah.
Because they know renewable is cheaper over the long term. Like there's really if you're starting from not having that much of a built out energy infrastructure, it's a lot better to build renewables. The only issue is the capital lies with the oil producers, with the gas producers, right? So they can sacrifice some of that upfront cost and they can go into those poorer countries and say, hey, we'll offer you these huge discounts to start out so that they can establish their infrastructure there, which is why something like this is needed from the U.S., right? It needs to kind of balance it out from the U.S. and other rich countries.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, Brazil is doing some investing too to help restore some other carbon sinks, right?
Yeah, this was a big thing that Brazil announced. They are investing $204 million into restoring the Amazon rainforest, which is really, really important. The country, so they're looking to restore land the size of Latvia. It's like hundreds of thousands of square miles.
That's
which
so
is
interesting. Latvia is a unit of measurement.
Yeah, I know. It was weird, but I kind of liked seeing that in the article.
I love that.
Part of this will also mean it will include removing 1.65 billion tons of CO2 from the atmosphere by 2030 based on planting all of these trees. There's a fear and a pretty popular theory from a Brazilian environmental scientist that the Amazon is really close to this tipping point where it's been facing drought because of climate change and because of having so much of the forest cut down that it's not only facing drought, but a lot of the vegetation is dying off because the ecosystem is being affected so badly that it could die out and become a savanna rather than the rainforest it currently is.
God, that's out of a nightmare.
Yes, which is completely terrifying and would set us back that much further in the battle against climate change, not to mention just what it would do to the ecosystem and everything around it. So the calls to reforest a bunch of the Amazon have gotten louder and louder as it's been feared that the tipping point becomes closer and closer. So yeah, I have on here, it's estimated that 270,000 square miles need replanting to avoid the tipping point, which is obviously a big ask, but clearly seems warranted given the risks.
And it seems they have the political movement right now. Lula da Silva is the president of Brazil at the moment, and he's like a part of the Socialist Labor Party there, and he is a strong environmentalist advocate. This is one of the big things he ran on against Jair Bolsonaro in the election a few years ago. Jair Bolsonaro, the previous president of Brazil, was cutting down the rainforest at one of the fastest rates we've seen, really expanding it for cattle farming, for oil drilling even, or something like that. But Lula da Silva comes in, all that stuff stops. The replanting has gone up exponentially. And now we have this other investment where we're going to see even more replanting. So I think the rainforest is in good hands with the Brazilian leadership right now, and Lula isn't up for election in a while. So
yeah, that's good. They just have to be fast.
Yeah.
Because droughts are getting worse as climate change keeps doing its thing. And so the one other thing I wanted to talk about was this report that came out at the same time as COP28 on greenwashing. And this is kind of interesting to me because it's a really niche area, but it's one that will affect the green transition pretty significantly, I think. So this organization, IOSCO, noted that most jurisdictions don't specifically define greenwashing in legally binding provisions. So what is greenwashing, right? It's when companies or organizations report that their practices are more sustainable than they actually are, right? So it's misleading to consumers a lot of the time, but because greenwashing isn't defined by governments, they can get away with it, and it's not really a problem. So there are a couple ways that companies do this. They're called green bleaching and green hushing. green bleaching is when asset managers play down their sustainability credentials to avoid regulatory requirements. So it's like, even if companies have certain ESG requirements that they slap on themselves to look good to their consumer base or to their investors, they play them down to governments when they send reports or they report on their earnings, so they don't have to follow certain laws. And then green hushing is underreporting sustainability credentials to those investors to avoid investor scrutiny and to avoid kind of higher expectations in how they transform in the green transition. So this is, I don't know, it's interesting to me because it suggests there's this area that governments need to start focusing on where they get really specific about which companies are following the guidelines they lay out for the behaviors that they need to qualify for the trillions of dollars of incentives and tax credits that are coming their way as governments try to speed the transition up.
Right. So now all these companies, if they're green bleaching, if I'm understanding this right, they're going to be green bleaching so that the government thinks they need more tax credits to meet their carbon reduction goals?
More so, they're going to be green bleaching. They're going to be green bleaching so governments aren't concerned about the effects of their operations on the environment.
Gotcha. Okay. During my first internship, I worked at an investment bank for my first internship, and one of the first projects I was on was helping my manager pick which ESG rating software would be used by the company.
Yeah.
That was one of my first assignments. And when we were doing these demos, it was very, very new. I mean, I got in there, I think I was 20. And so ESG was just becoming a thing, and the tools that they were using were not great. They were using basically Python scripts and web scrapers to go through the internet and take out every news article that was related to a company and then pull out keywords related to green energy policy, related to diversity, related to all this other stuff, and then give it a score based off the number of occurrences of that word per article written about the company.
Yeah.
That's how they were making ESG scores. So it's not a well-regulated environment at all. These ESG scores and the methodologies of all these different ESG ratings are so vastly different from company to company.
Exactly. And it's super informal, right?
Super informal.
And so one of the solutions that they suggest is let's have planned climate-related corporate disclosures where there's a specific list of, okay, you have to say how many fossil fuels or how much were your emissions in each of your different operations.
Yeah.
Right. What does that serve in your company? So that it can be available to the government so that they can know who to provide incentives to, and available to the public so that they can know who they want to buy from based on that information.
Totally. The same way the company needs to release their assets, liabilities, liquidity, all that stuff, they need to release their carbon process, their carbon emissions for each step of their production process.
Exactly.
Yeah.